Welcome, everybody. How you doing on a beautiful day? Great. My name is Christopher Chavez. I'm the director of the Center for Latino, Latin American Studies. And I wanted to welcome you to today's graduate symposium, Breaking Boundaries, Transnational Perspectives on Health, Language, and Community. One of the most important things we do is to showcase the work and research of emerging scholars, and we're really happy to be here today. We're showcasing 3 scholars, Carolina Arredondo from Global Studies, Lidia Munoz Paniagua from Anthropology, and Stephanie Morales Curiel from Linguistics. I do want to say that none of this would have been possible without the support of many of our partners across campus. I want to give a shout out to the Division of Equity and Inclusion, who has been a strong supporter of this grant research and make it possible.
Is anybody here
I
besides
also want
you?
to thank the faculty who spend the time to review these applications and these grant
This
proposals. There's a lot of really smart, important research that's going on right now. And so we're always happy for the opportunity to fund it and to advance your research. And then to the staff at CLAS for making it possible to showcase this work and making it available to the public with the help that, we learn from it, we benefit from it. I also want to thank Dr. Kristen Yaris, my friend and colleague, who will be moderating today's events. But before I turn it over, I just wanted to say a couple of words about Dr. Yaris. She's an associate professor in the School of Global Studies and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. Her research lies at the intersection of immigrants, rights, and health equity. She is a publicly engaged scholar who has held roles on the Oregon Health Authority Equity Committee and the Lane County Board of Health Public Health Advisory Committee, in addition to being a prolific scholar. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Yaris.
And my daughter-in-law.
Thank you, everyone. Buenas tardes. Thank you for being here. It's so wonderful to celebrate the fantastic and exceptional research of our graduate students at University of Oregon. And thanks, Chris and Eli, for coordinating the event. To the other faculty who are here, thank you for the service that you do as part of CLAS. So a big part of my role today is to keep us on time. So without further ado, our first presenter this afternoon is Stephanie Morales Curiel. She was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. She's a third-year PhD student in the Department of Linguistics. She has her BA and MA in Anthropology. Her research interests include community language revitalization and documentation, second language acquisition, language and identity, and linguistics. The talk title is on the slide, so without further ado, Stephanie.
Oh, thank you. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about a specific community that is near and dear to my heart. San Lucas Quiavini is my parents' hometown community. Both my parents come from here, and they both speak the language from here. Okay, oh. Something happened. I don't know what
I can try to report. Sorry, one moment.
It shows up on here, but not on here. Oh, that one shows up. How come you're with this one?
Oh, there we go.
Oh. It's loading.
All right. Let's assume it's loading.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have my presentation on my end, so I'll just get started from there. Okay, so to kind of introduce the situation at hand, despite the Ley General de Derechos Lingüísticos de los Pueblos Indígenas, which recognizes the high linguistic diversity of Mexico, many of the indigenous languages in Mexico are considered endangered. Domains of use for these indigenous languages are limited to an oral capacity. Literacy is predominantly taught and learned in Spanish, which is introduced and learned upon a child's entry in school. So this project presents the challenges in opening writing domains for the San Lucas Quiavini Zapotec communities, and it argues that variation, which we'll talk more about later on, as well as community input must be considered to develop and sustain a culture of writing and literacy. Literacy practices in SLQZ need to be promoted, but should not be hampered by a prescriptive stance in the implementation of an orthographic system. To introduce the community, so San Lucas Quiavini is actually located in the Central Valley of Oaxaca, about 15 minutes away from Tlacolula de Matamoros. According to INEGI 2020, there are 1,547 speakers of Zapotec in the community, and they're usually around age 5 and up. However, the total community count is somewhere around 1,700 people in the hometown. Now, there is a large community in diaspora, and it's concentrated in Los Angeles, California. However, to have exact numbers, unfortunately, there are none. Chavez Peon in 2010 estimated that about 2,000 community members were residing in the US, but 2010 to 2024, that number has obviously increased. Unfortunately, what does tend to happen in diaspora is that there's very minimal transmission of the language to children born in diaspora. I am one of those children. My parents did not transmit Zapotec to me. And so now as an adult, I do find my process of learning Zapotec to be a little difficult. So San Lucas Quiavini Zapotec, which I'll further refer to in this presentation as SLQZ, falls under the Western Tlacolula Zapotec node and is part of the larger Otomanguean stock. It has its own language family, and while there are numerous Zapotec languages neighboring SLQZ, intelligibility varies from town to town. So someone who is, let's say, for example, in Santana del Valle, might not understand the Zapotec from San Lucas. This language is a little bit phonologically complex in that there are 4 tones. We have a high tone, a low, a falling, and a rising. English and Spanish are not tonal languages. And there are 4 phonation types in the language. There is modal, breathy, creaky, and laryngerized, which is also referred to in the literature as interrupted. These are manipulations in the vocal folds that create a distinct sound. And by manipulating your vocal folds and your tones, you get 2 distinct words. So some of the tonal and phonation combinations that we have, for modal, we have high, low, falling, and rising. So we also have, for breathy, we have low falling tones that are permissible. For creaky, we have high, low falling, which is permissible. And for interrupted, we have high, low falling. To give some insights into what these sound like, I'm going to play some audio of near minimal pairs, which are just distinctions solely based on phonation, but there are some tonal inflections occurring.
Ve,
This is the first one. This is a modal voice. This is what you would normally use when you're talking.
ve,
This is a breathy voice. You can kind of hear that breathiness towards the end.
ve,
This is creaky, which is what we know as vocal fry. Vocal fry in the US is a little bit different, but this is kind of that same manipulation of the vocal folds that is happening. And we have interrupted.
sitting,
So sorry. This gets far away. Yeah, this is not loading correctly. Apologize for that. So
sitting,
sorry about that. So the orthographies have been proposed for SLQC. In 1999, there was a publication of a trilingual dictionary by Monroe and Lopez. Unfortunately, the orthography for this dictionary was complex and it was not received very well in the community. Tone was not marked and phonation was not marked either. And this made it difficult to differentiate between words. We have for here an example, that is not here actually, sorry. We have 2 very similar words, which are 13 and 15. 13 is saying and 15 is saying. 15 and 13 are written exactly the same with no phonation distinction and no, you have tone, but there's no phonation distinction. In the dictionary, all you see is just a word, for example, like 2 and 2. And so they're spelled exactly the same. However, these are 2 very distinct words.
sin,
Oh, well, we got the audio. So in 2007, there was an updated orthography that was introduced via the publication of a textbook titled Colloquium. This textbook was designed with college-level learners in mind. It's been used at UCSD, UCLA, and it's currently now being used at La Universidad del Pueblo in Tlacolula. Tlacolula, as I mentioned before, is 15 minutes away. However, they have their own Zapotec variant. In this grammar book, there is a pronunciation guide. However, many entries as well do not mark tone and they don't mark phonation. For example, in the word turtle and coyote, nope, didn't load. Turtle and coyote, they are both listed exactly the same, spelled exactly the same, B-E-U, B-E-U. However, there is phonation distinction between these two. We have a breathy distinction and a creaky distinction. I'm gonna hope it plays it.
Bell,
That is turtle
bell,
and that is coyote. Two very distinct words written exactly the same. So while not everyone in the community can read and write in Zapotec using one of the previously mentioned orthographies, there are some individuals who can. In 2011, the Colectivo Literario Quiavini, which is composed of young poets from the Telesecundaria in San Lucas, they published a collection of poems in Zapotec. And while this should, in hindsight, have opened the doors to a culture of literacy, again, sustainability is a little complex in communities where transmission is oral and orthographies aren't really taught long-term. During my data collection, a former member of the Colectivo opened about his journey in learning to read and write in SLQZ and stated that it was hard to hear that you don't know your language and that you have to relearn something you think you already know. The difficulties faced in the learning process may have resulted in discouragement. And so oftentimes this is something you see, discouragement, and corrections can often lead speakers and learners to believe that mainstream teachers are alphabetically literate and the only processors of knowledge. So it shifts the knowledge bearer from the community member to someone who's presenting in orthography. So currently there is no recognized orthography being used among community members. Most community members who do communicate in Zapotec tend to use voice messages when conversing. If there are written forms being produced, most community members do use Spanish-based orthographies. However, most online communication, like on Facebook, Twitter, which is now X, is normally communicated and done in Spanish. So my research focused on variation, and since 1999, there has been a mention of variation in SLQZ that's been underdescribed in the literature. Variation is specific to interspeaker variation at the phonetic level. This means that there are slight differences in the way that certain community members pronounce and say words that doesn't change the word entirely. So what you'll find is that you'll have a vowel shift for one word between two people, or that the phonation from breathy to modal is a little bit longer or shorter, which is kind of hard when you're learning the language to distinguish, oh, wait, am I hearing a word with a breathy phonation or a creaky phonation? And we also found that there is differences in duration of final consonants. In the summer, I spoke with 50 consultants. 4 were monolingual Zapotec speakers. 5 speakers were recorded in Los Angeles, while the rest were recorded in San Lucas. I used a list of near minimal pairs, which are words only differentiated by a tonal distinction or a phonation distinction. All participants answered a language survey, and this was done to collect as much language history as possible and to see if there's any socio components that affect language. So while tone or phonation may aid in giving some indication of which lexeme is being used, or which word is being used, not everyone makes this distinction abundantly clear. For example, be, which is mesquite bean, and be, which is mold, has that breathiness distinction to be the important one to tell you which is which. While the duration of breathy, creaky, or interrupted phonation may not pose an issue for an L1 speaker, that the lack of phonation distinction or prominence may pose a critical issue for a learner. When we're considering building a culture of literacy, we do have to consider speakers in the L1, which are the first language, and new speakers that are going to come from diaspora. In the case of orthography, if tone is not marked, then the phonation needs to be marked, but this all depends on which feature is distinguishing these two words. So right here, I have a spectrogram, two spectrograms. A spectrogram is a visual representation of frequencies that make up sounds. Sorry. What we are seeing are the frequencies of the sounds that make up two distinct words. The first word is guia, which is flower, and then the second one is rock. So these two words are very, very similar. I'm gonna play, hopefully it'll play, some audio that from one speaker. Our first speaker is a 40-year-old female speaker, and our second speaker is a 60-year-old male speaker.
Here, here,
Here. Here.
So if you can hear, there are differences in the pronunciation of that breathiness between the female speaker and the male speaker. You can still pick up that they're breathy, but that clear distinction is more prominent in the male speaker than it is in the female. So when we're looking at word final consonants, often what you find are differences in duration of these consonants. With some consonants, specifically looking at S and Z, depending on how long you produce that S or Z, you might find that your S sounds a little more like a Z, or your Z sounds a little more like an S if it's too long. Again, for new learners, learning the language, this can pose a little bit of a difference. However, this ambiguity can extend to the L1 speaker at the writing level if they feel that they're not producing an S for the word and it's actually written with a Z. I'm going to play for you now the first clip of a 74-year-old monolingual female speaker contrasted with a 24-year-old female speaker that's bilingual in Spanish and Zapotec. The 24-year-old learned Spanish when she was about 6 years old, so she's an early bilingual.
yes, 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 yes.
So if you can hear here, there is a difference between the first two words. However, between the two speakers, one has a longer S and the other has a shorter S, which again, if the speaker were to pick up, to begin her process in writing Zapotec, it'll be a little difficult for her to say, oh no, I'm going to write this word with an S or a Z. And while that might seem like a problem, it actually isn't. So variation does exist at all ages in the community, and no two individuals will sound the same, and no individual will always sound the same every single time. SLQZ needs an adequate, accessible orthographic system so that the language can be used in written domains. And one of the ways in which we can allow for this accessibility is by considering the variation present in the community. Additionally, an orthography needs to allow flexibility in spelling and push away from prescriptive approaches. Like King 2019 stated, simply creating an orthography and dictionary does not result in a culture of literature and writing in the language. So even if grammar books and dictionaries are published and made readily available, time needs to be invested in teaching and developing these orthographies with communities and alongside these communities. So thank you so much. Gracias, Joseñuel. Thank you, class, for funding this research, Eli, for helping us coordinate, the San Lucas Quiavini community, and my advisor, Gabriela Perez Valles.
So due to Stephanie's good use of time, we have a few moments here for some questions. So would you like to field your own questions?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, could you just raise your hand, and if you're in the back of the room, maybe speak up a bit, or even stand up to make sure that we can hear. Oh, we have a mic.
I mean, some of the participants, do you notice an impact on kind of regional dialect? Does that impact communication at all?
So all of these speakers are from the same community. They're all living in the same community. All of them are from the same hometown. All of them grew up and were raised here. The only variation that I did see in terms of region is if an individual spent a lot of time abroad in the US and returned back, usually what you'll find is that community members will say, oh, their Zapotec is it's a little different. It sounds a little more like Spanish than
Right.
Zapotec.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I was wondering if there's also, because you played, for example, like older speakers versus younger speakers, but it also seemed like those two categories coincided with monolingual Zapotec and bilingual use. And so I wonder if those two different sort of variations, if there's a Venn diagram there, if the variation really is just age related, or if it is like exposure to other languages. So
it's actually both. It is age related and it's also exposure to languages. For a lot of the males in my list of participants, I did find that the males had a stronger, or rather, they had more experience with English. And so their differences kind of was you can kind of sorry, I'm trying to see what I'm trying to say, sorry. With them, at least, there is kind of a pattern where it's shifting a little bit more towards English. However, among the younger generations, there's a shift in not only vowels or consonants or phonations. You'll have kind of a shift in that there's evidence of language loss where they won't know what word to produce. For example, I had a lot of hard time collecting the word turtle among the younger generations than I did among the older generations.
I'll just call on myself since I have the mic. Thank you so much for this really fascinating presentation. I really appreciate the challenge here intellectually as you tack from English to Spanish to Zapotec and then technological problems on top of it. So wonderful job. You mentioned along the way several dictionaries, you call them orthographies or books. It sounded like a textbook that's being used at the college level. Could you speak about, and I really appreciate your attention to kind of the pragmatics of language acquisition and language learning. So is one of your broader aims for this project to sort of inform like a textbook or the way the language is taught in the community? Did you make any relationships with teachers, or could you speak to that a bit?
Yeah. So in diaspora, the language is not being taught at all. If it is, it's among family members. In my case, I'm learning directly from my parents and also my family in Oaxaca. However, there's not really a school, if you must call it, or somewhere where community members living in diaspora can learn Zapotec. There's no place where you go at 5 p.m. to have a little study session on Zapotec. And so that is one of my goals, to develop something for community members in diaspora so that they do learn the language. And it'll also make it easier for me to learn the language.
That's fantastic. We have time for maybe one more question for now, and then we can hold some towards the end as well. What are the two of you?
Mine is very similar.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. I also enjoyed your research and learning about it. If you had a magic wand and you could wave it for university administrators, presidents of universities all around the world, what would you tell them about how they can partner with communities to better preserve these languages and to help communities understand their importance?
I think it's important to have conversations with communities and not to go into communities with the purpose of writing a dictionary or writing a grammar book. Oftentimes in linguistics, that was an old practice that was common, where people would just go to a community and say, I want to learn your language, tell me about it, and I'm going to do it, and I'm going to describe it, and here is my academic merit for it. And so nothing is essentially given back to the communities. I like to think that here at the UO, we have linguists who teach you the opposite of that, who teach you to touch base with your community, to make sure that you're developing a relationship with the community and you're listening to the community needs and wants. Yeah, thank you.
That was so wonderful. Remind me in the next Q&A, we should ask questioners to also introduce themselves so we know who's in the room together. Do you want to load the next one? That would be great. I also just realized we have participants via Zoom. So if you are joining us remotely this afternoon, maybe you can write your questions in the chat and we can take Zoom questions at the end of our time together today. So our next presenter is Carolina Arredondo Sanchez Lira. Carolina is an international student who grew up in Guanajuato. She graduated from the University of Oregon. She's a Pata through and through with a BA in Political Science and Latin American Studies. Fun fact, I've known her over 10 years, since those years. Currently, Carolina is a MA student in the program in Global Studies here. She has worked with Lane County Public Health and on the I'm Healthy or Soy Sano program that focused on providing health coverage to undocumented families. She's also worked as a disease intervention specialist on HIV and STI work here in our community. And she worked, and I got to work with her on COVID response in minority communities during the COVID-19 pandemic, when Latinx communities were disproportionately affected. Through her experiences, Carolina has learned the importance of inclusive public health strategies, and so she decided to pursue her master's in global studies with a health and global health focus in order to design high-quality healthcare delivery systems for stigmatized communities. So please join me in welcoming Carolina.
That's fine. Yeah. Let's see where is the mouse right here. Yeah. Is there my keyboard? Yes, perfect. Okay. I'll try to not spill water. So hi everyone. My name is Carolina, pronounced she, her, hers. This is a presentation for the title of my research project is How a Community Health Clinic Has Responded to the War on Drugs. I do want to say these are my 3 research questions. I want to give a trigger warning because some of the quotes, some of the information that I'm going to be sharing can be triggering. I am talking about sexual assault or just like assaults overall on individuals, so I do want to recognize that. So I have one first question of my research is what types of spaces does a nonprofit clinic create for women who use drugs and live on the border? The second one is what are the social effects of the harm reduction strategies and how do they impact women who use drugs? Thirdly, how has the war on drugs marginalized women who use drugs in Baja California? So just to let you know, it's a snippet of my research because I could go for hours to talk about this. But again, I did my research in Tijuana, Baja California with the organization Preven Casa, which is located in the Zona Norte. And all of that you see in blue is the Zona Norte neighborhood. What you see in red is the downtown Tijuana. You can see the flag, the American flag, that's the division between US and Mexico. And then Preven Casa is right in the middle. You can also see a few shelters around it with the yellow pinpoint. And then the purple one is the red light district because sex work is legal in Tijuana. So Preven Casa is a community health organization that provides free services. And the services that they provide are primary health services, HIV testing, TB testing, treatment, and also just overall primary health services. They offer free showers, a change of clothes, mental health services as well on the spot. And one of the most important things that they offer is harm reduction services, specifically with needle exchange, free naloxone, Narcan to reverse overdoses. And they have the second unsanctioned safe site in Mexico targeted for women. With this, it is important to mention that they are the only organization doing this type of work in Tijuana, Baja California. The second unsanctioned site in Baja California is located in Mexicali with their partner organization, Verter. So they do a lot of work in Tijuana. I'm not gonna go through all of the data, just gonna provide it there for you all to know kind of what is the patient demographic that they serve. Just want to pinpoint 2 things. The majority of the social demographics or patients are male, with that 82%, and then 18% are women. And then the other part is 91% of them have been born in Mexico and 66% of them have a history of deportation. I also want to just point out that the living conditions really change according to everyone. And renting a room over here looks very different. Renting a room in Tijuana what it would look in the United States. So I just wanted to recognize that too. This is my research design. I have 5 steps in my research design. Again, I'm not gonna go over all of it because I wanna go through the snippets of the research questions and the information that I went. But I spent a couple of months in Tijuana, right there. Okay, so the inclusion criteria for the staff interview was very basic, just 1 point. The staff needed to work in Prevencasa. Let me just backtrack a little bit. In my research design, I wanted to do focus groups with individuals who go to the clinic to seek services, and then also interview the staff who provide services there. The staff, in total, they have a paid staff of 8 individuals, but they also have volunteers. They also have doctors that are doing their residency there, but they are not paid. Because of that, I chose to only interview 5 people in different kind of groups. They have the admin, the medical team, and the harm reduction team. So I just kind of wanted to have a distribution of each people in each of the teams. The inclusion criteria for the focus groups were 2 points. The first one, they needed to be self-identified as a woman who uses drugs. Secondly, they needed to have already sought a service at Prevencasa prior to the focus group. And while I recognize that I had planned to do 9 focus groups, I did 4 because obviously when I got to Tijuana, I saw there was much more dense to do outreach, to go out and gain the trust of the participants in the field. And because it was just chaotic at the moment that I was in Mexico. So I did 4 focus groups. In the first one I had 6, second one I had 9, and the third one I had 7, and in the final I had 9. And they actually wanted to continue the groups, the individuals, after I left. So this is my preliminary findings through thematic analysis. And this is the first question that I put in at the beginning. So one topic that became very apparent and thematic, it was the violation of human rights. At the beginning of the administration of the war on drugs, well, at the beginning of the administration of AMLO, he had claimed that he was gonna end the war on drugs, but that was not the case. Instead, he brought the National Guard into the streets. So now we can see an increase of human rights violations by the police and the National Guard. So especially if you're a person who uses drugs, who's a woman, and you're on house, your percentage of vulnerability is going to be higher. Some of the observations that I did is that I did observe random checks of people. On my way to Prevencasa, I would see how the National Guard would stop a man and just check them to see if they had drugs, even though certain drugs, well, small quantities of drugs have been decriminalized in Mexico. And if you try to advocate for them, then you were in the same spot that you were going to be checked. So that's clearly a human rights violation. While I always saw it happening to men, I never saw it happening to women, but in the focus groups, the participants did mention that that has happened to them and that the police and the National Guard do steal their money and their things when they pat them. And the second one that it came up in the focus groups, which is kind of heavy too, it was a lot of physical assaults and a sexual assault. So I do have a following quote with that to demonstrate that. This is from one of the participants in the focus groups. A couple months ago, I was walking towards the shelter I am staying. It was already dark. A police car with 2 policemen in stopped me. They told me to get in the patrulla at the police car. I was scared, so I did, but they took me to a hill and they were going to rape me. Luckily, one of the policemen noticed me I was pregnant and they let me go. It's important to notice that this participant is 50 years old. So that also stuck to me when they shared in this group. So you can see the human rights violation and the assaults are happening from both and the police and the National Guard. But this case in particular was with the police. There's also structural violence, of course, because one of the biggest ones is that there's a lack targeted of services towards women, especially women who uses drugs. A lot of the organizations are asking women to not use drugs if they want to go and seek any other services. If they're hoping to get into a rehab treatment and if they have children, then that's even more challenging because where do they live their child? And the other part, if they go and seek a service in another organization, they use substances and that is being to be found, they can take their children away for them. So that's another vulnerability. Second point, removing funding from NGOs. At the beginning of the administration, AMLO removed all the funding from nonprofits in order to fight corruption. And so one of the consequences to this is Prevencasa really struggles with funding for resources. In comparison now, they are only able to do needle exchange. They can only give 3 needles per day per person. And prior to this administration, they were able to give 10 needles per person per day. So that drastically changed. Another observation that became clear is that the first month that I was there, they ran out of condoms and they didn't know when they were going to get more condoms. And that is important because in the area, there is a huge increase of numbers of HIV and other communicable diseases. So you can see that that's in itself a structural violence. The third one is the obstacles in seeking resources outside of the Zona Norte. It's very limiting that there is the only organization. It is helpful that individuals that reside there, they can go and seek services in the area, but it's still very limiting to other individuals that reside somewhere else. Second question. So the type of spaces that they provide. Throughout the focus groups, it was evident that the participants recognized that Prevencasa creates a safe and inviting space. They claim that there was no judgment, that the staff treats them like their family. So that's why they tend to go. And instead of going to the Hospital General, like the general hospital, they prefer to go to Prevencasa because they're treated with a little bit more humanity than they are treated somewhere else. The services that they have, they help to reduce harassment, for example, and something that I have to admit that it kind of also shocked me because I have taken these services for granted is the shower, the access to a shower. If you're a woman, if you're on house, that's a big thing. One of the participants in the focus group said, you know, and this was a trans woman who said that they tend to be more, tend to be stopped frequently when they don't shower and they don't change their clothes versus when they come to the clinic and they can take a shower and they can change their clothes, they are not frequently stopped by the police. So that just, I thought that was super important that they just put this service in the organization. And the third one is a safe consumption site. We know that a safe consumption site is a place where individuals can go safely use drugs, prevent an overdose. But more than anything, what I recognize that Prevencasa is doing is creating, the name of the place is La Zona, is to create an inviting place for women to just relax if they don't want to be outside, to draw because they have art supplies there, or just to come in and talk with someone, just to really hang out during the day when Prevencasa is open. And one example of that is that after doing this focus groups with the individuals, I had some of the participants coming in the middle of the day and ask me if they could just give me a hug or if they could just talk about what they went through that day. So that was really emotional for me, that they just needed to talk with someone. And here is a quote from one of the participants. What Prevencasa represents for me? A better quality of life. At least here they have doctors who have a heart. They also mentioned about numerous instances in which they were harassed or they were mistreated when they went to the hospital in Tijuana. Third question, what are the social effects of harm reduction strategies? So it creates community and resilience. Obviously, what Prevencasa does is more than a nonprofit. They really value their work. I really value the work that they're doing, and they also see their clients as a community because they're there every day. So the first thing that I saw during my start interviews and my group interviews is that the community events they hold, if you can see, I wrote La Posada, and those are 2 piñatas that we did for La Posada that was on the winter. It creates a sense of normalcy. It gives them just kind of a little bit of a more normal that instead of what happens outside in the neighborhood. The other part I have to recognize is that there's a lot of resilience because it is very traumatic to just live in a place where you're fighting for resources. You see overdoses happen every day. Narcan is not easily accessible in Mexico. It's a controlled substance and you need to get a medical prescription. So it differs from what it is here in the United States. So I want to recognize that the staff and the participants are very resilient for given the situation that they're in. And that creates community. And also what I observe in the groups is that after the women, they were sharing their lived experiences, they started supporting each other. When one of the women said, you know, I was assaulted by this police, this is the plate number, another few participants said, let's help you to make a report, or let me teach you how to make an anonymous report. So there was this sense of community and resilience after talking really traumatic things in groups. And then the staff advocates, as I mentioned before, individuals are just randomly stopped even outside of the clinic. And in the time that I was there, I observed 2 staff members going in front of the National Guard and defending the rights of the participants or the clients outside of the clinic. This is one of the quotes. The quote says, "I really like being able to do this intervention more from a health perspective. Obviously, this whole issue of drugs and sex work and violence exists throughout the city, but the Zona Norte has always carried that stigma. I don't deny it, but we must also recognize that there are families who have been here for years, generation after generations, who go to primary school, who have been working here for many years." And I love the quote because it highlights the importance of doing the community work and not only doing research, right? Really believing in this organization for the work that they're doing in the community. Main lessons. 1, women who use drugs in Tijuana face a higher degree of violence and stigma, because it doesn't mean that it doesn't happen because it's not visible. If not, it's even more dangerous. And women that were not able to learn about other people's experiences until they started talking and they realized like, oh, that happens to you too. Second, while Prevencasa offers services to all, they're targeting more resources for women because they recognize that there are, 1, not a lot of resources for women, and 2, is really important to provide those safe spaces. Like now, La Zona, after we did the focus groups, La Zona, the safe consumption site, had a self-defense workshop, and they also are doing movie Fridays. And what really struck me after I checked with one of the staff members of how that has been going on, they shared with me that one of the participants or one of the clients that goes to the movie Friday said that they cannot remember when it was the last time they went to a movie. They went to see a movie. So that was very shocking too. Giving ideas for women to avoid being harassed and stopped if they need to go to Prevencasa, they can show a medical ID and give that reason. So we got that going. And then 3rd, harm reduction is effective and is highly needed to be funding, not only because it shapes the behaviors, and I want to challenge how we think about, oh, it's high risk, this risk behavior, but just thinking about in a socio-ecological model, you know, a harm reduction approach really incorporates individuals and meets them where they are at. And thanks. I want to thank all the funders. I want to obviously thank you so much, class, for your time and for giving me the grant. I also want to thank my professor Yaris for all of the help. But above all, I want to thank Prevencasa, because without them, this would have not been possible. They do a lot of important work that I'm amazed how they do it, and they're showing up for the community. And I also want to thank the women that were participants in my groups, because they share the lived experiences with me, which is not easy. And if you want to know more about Prevencasa, I wouldn't be doing my work if I didn't put their information there, because they're amazing. And so thank you so much. I was ready to run.
I think I scared our presenters. I was like, have to keep to the time. But what's so wonderful, it's allowing us a little more time for questions and comments. So from the audience, please just go ahead and raise your hand. And if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself so we know who's in community in the room, that would be great.
They're not questions, no problem.
Chris Chavez, School of Journalism and Communication. Thank you for this powerful and important work. Is there a kind of intervention that you would like to see this research result in, whether it's a policy change or best practices for other kinds of clinics? Because it seems like it's just ripe for intervention.
Yes, I mean, policy change would be amazing, right? If the government wasn't doing the war on drugs. I think after all, what it will be very neat is to encourage, if anyone is going to keep doing research and keep going to, you know, do this kind of research, do it for a community-based focus and really, really support the work that the organizations are doing, because that's really what they need, right? Just challenging the system. Unfortunately, I don't think that the Mexican government is going to change anytime soon, but it's also important to elevate those voices and those community organizations that are doing the work and show up for them.
Thank you, Carolina. Audrey Lucero, I'm a professor in the College